Hello again, and welcome back to this fourth session of the World Heritage City Lab. We're very happy to have you back and very happy to welcome our session leads for today. We have Daniele Pini and Elizabeth Vines. Elizabeth is joining us from Australia, where she works as an urban designer, an architect and urban designer. And Daniele Pini is joining us from Italy, where he's been practicing and teaching for a number of years in architecture, urban planning, urban design. So we're going to turn it over now first to Daniele and Liz. And then we also have with us two excellent case studies today, one of Tunis and one of Lamu in Kenya. And we will first have the session leads and then join the case studies. I want to also thank Imam Benani for very kindly agreeing to be the rapporteur for today. Thank you very much. All right, over to you, Liz and Daniele. How would you like to do this? Do you want to go together, or are you going to speak first?
I will start speaking first, and if you could put the PowerPoint up, we will get straight into it. And we're both very excited to be leading this topic on rethinking urban infrastructure in historic urban context. And it's a great pleasure to me. One of the fantastic things about Zoom is that now I have a new friend in Ferrara, Daniele. We didn't know each other before, but we found we have great commonalities in our approach. So if you could put the PowerPoint up, that would be great. And I'll get straight into it so that we keep to our time frame. Excellent. I'm not seeing it on my screen yet. Is it on everyone else's screen? It's only...
It says it's sharing screen.
Yes, but I'm not having, it's not my PowerPoint that's up.
No.
Okay, are you seeing any PowerPoint?
Only a small section of it. Only a small section of it.
Okay.
And it's not our PowerPoint. It's, I think, one of the next speakers.
Okay, so I'm going to have to fix that. Just 1 second, sorry.
Sure.
Maybe you could just start talking about the idea of urban infrastructure while I get this fixed, because I'm not sure why it's doing it.
Okay, well, we have 4 key messages that we want to share with you. Firstly, we're going to do a quick recap on the whole recommendation, which many of you will know about. Then we're going to talk about the impacts of proposed new infrastructures on historic cities, but talking particularly about public realm. Daniele will cover that. Then I will cover a topic dear to my heart on the impact of new development and quality of design. And then Daniele will finish with creative approaches to infrastructure in historic urban contexts. And perhaps if you could tell me when the screen comes up, because I'm now on another screen. Hang on, this is, here we go.
Fine.
That's great. Excellent. And is that full screen on everybody's? There we go. Fantastic. Okay. So if we could have the next, I've run through these. Oh, yes, just the first slide. Here are our 4 key messages. I won't repeat them again, and I'll go straight on. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Just some general points that we'd like to start with, not the next one. Go back, please. Go back a slide, please. Thank you. That the management of urban infrastructure is a key challenge, and this includes, sorry, can we stay on my slide? Next slide, please. Sort of jumping around a bit. Not sure, yes, keep on this slide, please. So urban infrastructure, what do I mean? I mean public spaces, roads, car parks, transit developments, and how these impact on heritage values. But we're also going to include the importance of the built environment and how new development impacts on existing character. And here we have a range of images of different cities, infrastructure, new buildings, public spaces, and as you can see, bottom right, high rise in Yangon. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So traffic infrastructure clearly can disrupt the urban fabric, creating visual and spatial barriers. And a key city that does this, of course, is Los Angeles. So can monuments and heritage, which is, can we go back, please? It's moved on. Thank you. I'm not sure why this is jumping around. Can we go back, Jyoti, please? Okay, I'll stay on this. Thank you. And public spaces such as historic streets and squares are often occupied by inappropriate structures. We're moving around on these slides. It's very difficult. Can we not go backwards and forwards? Just slay on the, could we go forward 2 slides, please? We're back at the beginning.
The problem is, when you give the order to move to the next slide, you have to wait a little bit. It will show on your screen like a couple of seconds later. So when you say it again, they will click forward again. Sorry, I interrupted, but just to explain things.
Okay, all right. Next slide, please. And next slide, please. Okay, so conventional solutions are often intended to increase speed and make traffic by bringing heavy traffic flows into the historic city and the surroundings. And these solutions must be rejected as they create congestion, hampering the perception of and the accessibility of the historic fabric and its heritage assets. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to flick through a few slides here about the Hull model, which I think is probably familiar to most of us on this webinar, knowing that it was introduced in 2011. And I really include this just for material for the participants. But a key point of the Hull landscape is that it recognises a city as a result of historic layers, and that it includes the broader urban context and its geographical setting. Next slide, please. And this is our first message, that you can use this as a useful tool and model. The Hull recommendation stresses the importance of the relationship of heritage to its wider urban context, improving connectivity, walkability, and the public realm issues, all crucial factors for historic cities. As I've said before, major road insertions can generally separate and destroy neighbourhoods. Next slide, please. There have been brochures prepared in 2013. These are on the internet. Next slide, please. Followed in 2016 by the Hull Guidebook, which includes the challenging factor that 70% of all humanity will live in cities by 2050. The pressure on cities is unprecedented. Now, maybe the current virus might change that, but I think we all need to prepare for that. Next slide, please. Now, the Hull approach outlined 6 critical steps, and following the meeting earlier this year in Fukuoka and the material circulated from that meeting, this has been expanded into 8 critical steps. But I'd like to stress that many localities have developed their own methodologies and models, and I entirely agree with what Cameron said on Monday evening, where he really summarised things by saying, prepare your information, do thorough studies, do pilot studies as quickly as possible to demonstrate proposals. I think it's important that we're in action in what we're talking about. Next slide, please. And the toolkit is a useful one, and again is can be modifies, localized, it's very flexible, and there have been case studies undertaken, which you can see on this slide, from Australia through to Tanzania, 8 different case studies, all of great benefit to have a look at. Next slide, please. So the first recommendation, HAL recommendation, is what we're saying. It's a useful model. It helps us around the world. It's not a new category or heritage of type of World Heritage property. It's actually a process. And as I said, it's a guide only, but it's a useful one, adopted by UNESCO and very much ongoingly debated. Next slide, please. The key points for HAL to remember is that it is a result of historic layering of cultural and natural values and attributes, extending beyond the traditional notion of just an ensemble. Next slide, please, into the broader urban context. The recommendation stresses the importance of connectivity and productivity of urban spaces to enhance social inclusion. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. And finally, the HAL recommendation, the key points is that it is a constantly moving document, and that by providing updated guidelines, sorry, the slides, the thing's gone on. Could we go back to that one, please? And then I'll move over to Daniele. I just want to finish with this slide here, showing that current strategies are relating their documents and guidelines to the relationship of the SDGs, which we've talked about earlier in this webinar. And now I'll move on to Daniele for the next slide for his session for our key message number 2. Thank you, Daniele.
Thank you. So the key message number 2 concerns the impact of new infrastructures on the public realm.
Daniele, can you please speak a little closer to the mic?
Oh, yes, sorry.
Thank you.
It's fine.
And
like
it's
this?
next slide, Jyoti.
Okay. The second message concerns the impacts of new infrastructures on the public realm. And the first point I would like to say is that this impact depends very much on planning decisions which are taken at a larger urban or metropolitan, sometimes even regional scale. This is the case of Köln, we will get back later, is a city in Germany, which was at risk at a certain moment to be put in the list of danger, but then it established a very large protection buffer zone for its for the cathedral, which is the World Heritage Sites, and developed a plan for the whole area that aims at preserving the city, the historic city, the buffer zone, creating a new system of infrastructure, a new system of transportation, walkability and mobility that is very sensitive to the characteristics of the urban fabric. Next. It is important to consider the fact that the public spaces form a system which is composed by streets and other different squares and different types of spaces. And this system not only is the represent the framework of the urban fabric, of the historic urban fabric, but it is also the elements which links the different heritage features that allows, for instance, the visibility of the monuments. Sometimes it creates a sequence of spaces, you know, that put in evidence the monuments or some specific heritage feature. On the other hand, this public space is also a space for work, is a space for meeting, is a space which have many different functions, we would say. And it is important to remember that in historic cities, streets and squares are not made for cars and vehicular traffic, but for people and their activities. And if we are talking of adaptive reuse for buildings, we have to talk of adaptive reuse also for the public spaces of the historic city. Next. On the other hand, the public realm in the historic cities is very often a heritage asset in itself that requires to be protected and enhanced as a fundamental attribute of OUV. Here we are in Cairo, but in many other cities we have spaces, public spaces, that are a fundamental attribute of the OUV. Next. In the public spaces, there are some infrastructures, such as the bridges, for instance, that do not have simply an Italian value, but may have an architectural interest that strongly characterize the city's historic and cultural identity. In some cities like Mostar, right below, the bridge, it's very important as a symbolic element. Next. The rebuilding of this bridge was a fundamental step for the reconciliation and the unity of the city that was very heavily struck by the war, by the ethnic war, with the separation of the two parts of the city. Next. On the other hand, the public realm is very important as a factor that forms sometimes and enhance, in any case, the sense of community. The public realm is a space for gathering and social interaction. It can be the venue of events that form its intangible heritage and form a sense of place, which in turn creates a sense of belonging to a space that defines the urban community, an urban community that shares the same space and therefore the same heritage values. Next. Next. Street art can contribute to reinforce this sense of community, giving the artist the possibility to contribute and engage in the city's environment. Next. Finally, it is important to consider that the public realm should be object of statutory protection and enhancement, exactly like the buildings. Very often when we talk of heritage and even of world heritage, we are talking of buildings or in any case of built environment. It is important to consider the public realm, the open spaces, in the same way and to provide statutory tools to protecting and enhance. Here is the case of Ferrara, where a large part of the historic city has been planned starting from the interventions of rehabilitation, requalification, upgrading of the public spaces in relation to the interventions on the public, on the built environment. Next. I think, Liz, you continue.
Yes, I'm very happy now to move on to the next topic, which is one dear to my heart as an architect, which is the issue about impact of new development, and that the design quality of new development is so important, but it also can be a key challenge for managing urban infrastructure. It's crucial to face the issue of new design and how it challenges the economic development and issues of urbanization. And these next series of slides are really to show you, in a sense, good and bad insertions into the environment. And the question is posed, who decides on what is good and bad design? Next slide, please. New development should be undertaken in an architectural style which is compatible with the surrounding unique character of the city, complementing its heritage and adaptively reusing existing buildings, inserting new buildings which are honest and contemporary in their architectural language. And the two examples in Penang are in fact 50s, 60s examples, and the one on the right in Montreal is a more recent insertion. Next slide, please. And it's very important to avoid fake imitation of historic architecture. And we do have a vexed issue of starchitecture, which is really an insertion, which is an iconic solution by generally well-known and well sought-after architects. But they can create great changes in the urban environment. And I believe a successful infill development is a contemporary piece of design of its own time. And I've said before, shouldn't copy or replicate. And I know the building on the left, Toronto, very well, having visited this on many occasions. And it's in fact not only 10 years or so after this insertion, it's actually being remodelled because as an architectural solution, it really didn't satisfy it, and it completely ignored the qualities of the building. The one on the right, I haven't been to. Next slide, please. And so that brings me to the issue of guidelines, which are often prepared for heritage cities, and I am a believer in guidelines. I think good architects can have debates with each other about achieving outcomes which have been debated through the development of these guidelines to ensure that new development respects the character of the place. There's often a design review process involved in approving new developments by qualified and skilled personnel, and processes to ensure that good design outcomes are achieved often now are assisted by the preparation of a heritage impact assessment report. Certainly these are now required for World Heritage Cities. Next slide, please. And you will see in the material provided in this webinar that I've included PDFs of two of my recent publications, Streetwise Asia and Streetwise Design. And the Streetwise Streetwise Design is the document which focuses on this issue about compatible infill design. Next slide, please. And Carlo, you'll be interested to see my examples here of Florence, of examples of new development, which I believe do not lie, they're not fake replicas, they're in sensitive new insertions into this urban landscape. Next slide, please. And here we have an example provided by Daniele on this example here, which is, did you want to say anything about this, Daniele?
It's a small housing in the lagoon of Venice, which reinterpreted the traditional fabric of a vernacular settlement, let's say. Okay,
next slide, please. And an example on the following slide is in the USA, in Santa Fe, which has the architectural characteristic of adobe and mud architecture. Next slide, please. And here you see, I think, the very skillful insertion of a architect, Frank Gehry, in the Dancing House in Prague, which would be known to many of you. Next slide, please. And an example from my original city, Melbourne, in Australia, where I think the new development in the slide below complements well the setting, but is clearly a contemporary insertion. And of course, there are key issues involved in appropriate new development, a key one for me being appropriate height. And now, Daniele, I move on to you. Next slide, please, for Daniele.
Yeah. The fourth message is about the approaches to historic urban infrastructures and to public realm that need to be at the same time sensitive and creative. It is important to point out that a wide variety of strategies is needed, building on the sense of community and providing different type of spaces for gathering, parks, planting, community gardens, and so on. So it cannot be reduced only to some kinds of conventional type of infrastructures. Next. We have to consider that the public realm in many historic cities is a very rare and precious commodity that, as I said, very often has a relevant heritage values, and that needs to be carefully protected and strategically managed, exactly like the built environment. Creative approaches can be adapted depending on the characteristics of the urban fabric. Next. For instance, it is important to consider the importance of a small-scale improvement, for instance, to bicycle and pedestrian networks, pocket parks, shared local community gardens, neighborhood housing cooperatives, and so on, reusing the space of the infrastructure, of the existing infrastructure. Here is the example of Mechelen, a city in Belgium, where an extensive program of rehabilitation of the public spaces has completely changed and qualified the image of the city. Next. It is important to consider that streets, squares, and public spaces can be reshaped and can be reorganized in order to limit the speed, especially of the traffic, and improve walkability, favoring social encounters, favoring the pedestrianization, walkability especially. Next. Here we go again to Köln, where an extensive program of pedestrianization has been implemented through different types of interventions on the streets and the public spaces, as well as on the transportation system, taking into account, based on a careful study of the urban morphology and a sensitive approach to the accessibility to the different heritage assets, mixing different types of intervention, ranging from parking, pedestrian streets, and so on. Next. Another aspect which is important to consider is that public spaces in historic cities can accommodate different types of mobility at the same time. Here is the case of Ghent, where you can see the tramway, the bicycles, the pedestrian using the same street. And it works very well without accident. Next. Or else we go back to Köln. We have to consider that the roof of the underground parking set in some strategic locations can be treated as park or square, adding to the public realm and creating a new significant approach to the heritage asset. Here on the right, you can see the platform which has been created beside the cathedral. That includes parking, but at the same time gives access to museum and to other cultural facilities, as well to the square surrounding the cathedral. Next. So here we go to the questions we propose for the debate. The first question is to understand, we would like to know if in your location of the different participants, there are specific challenges which are related to urban infrastructure and to its impact on the urban fabric of the historic city. Next. The second question is to know what kind of measures are implemented to improve the quality of the public spaces, ensuring the social interaction and inclusion, and to understand if there is pressure for demolition of some parts of the historic fabric in order to enhance the infrastructure, or if there are insertion of poorly designed new development which is not sustainable or appropriate to the historic context. Next. The third question is if there are public utilities and transport infrastructures which are outmoded or up to standards and visually intrusive. Fourth question. What kind of interventions can be envisioned to mitigate or to eliminate the infrastructure negative impact? Next. Final issues, final questions and points for debate. We recognize that there are many other issues. We only focused on public spaces, more or less. And we would like to know if there are other issues you want to discover about the public realm standards. That's all. I finished.
Okay, thank you very much. That was really, I mean, you've raised some very, very important points and raised questions. and also showed us a host of really very interesting examples. So thank you very much for this very thorough and detailed tandem, the two presentations together. You know, I really want to also emphasize how much it matters that you have been both working on the ground with local governments, and that has really brought some of the points that you are bringing to the fore. And mention also that that Daniele, in addition to all the years of work with various local governments, has been now teaching also at the Le Maire Center in Belgium at the Catholic University of Leuven, and Liz is has served as the past president of ICOMOS and comes to us representing ICOMOS in this meeting. And so your expertise in conservation is very clear. Before we move on to the case studies, I want to mention one point in addition to the different points raised by the that you've raised in your presentation, which is, why are we talking? You know, one might ask, today we're in a position where we're looking at this crisis, this health crisis that is really overwhelming cities. So why is it relevant to talk about urban infrastructure at such a moment? But as we have seen from some of the previous case studies, and as we are, I think we will have other case studies talking about it, and as we see from the news every day, many cities have already made a commitment towards certain type of infrastructure, and they have some projects are ongoing. So some places are seeing this as an opportunity where committed money can be taken forward. You don't have tourists, you know, you don't have to, it's easy to clear up the streets, so to say, and undertake construction at a rapid pace. So it's really an important moment to be cognizant of how else we could shape this kind of intervention. And this is something we want to be able to think about and develop strategies towards. Okay, great. Now we have, it's my great pleasure to invite Mohammed Ali Mwenje, who is the head of the National Museum of Kenya, Lamu World Heritage Site and Conservation Office. Mohammed, over to you.
Yeah, good afternoon to everyone. I'm hoping that my slides are with you.
Okay, so I will get them up. If you can start your introduction and give me a minute.
Yes, okay. Essentially, I think everybody has heard my name, Mohammed Ali Mwenje, currently head of Lamu Old Town, World Heritage Site and the Lamu Museums. Though I've been working in this town for the last 20 years in different capacities. And I have seen it evolving from enlistment to the current issues it is facing at the moment. Perhaps many of you have heard of the issues surrounding the Lamu Old Town, including a major port that is just being developed not very far from here. I have shared a few documents that you can possibly make reference to. I think I will just go ahead with my presentation. I think if you just go to the next slide, please. That's essentially Lamu as it's seen as you approach it. Either if you come by air or if you come by road, this is the kind of image that hits you when you arrive to Lamu. Next slide, please. Just an introduction is that, like many other historic towns, Lamu did not envisage the complex infrastructural conveniences of today. Thus, it did not provide for its integration. Even at its peak, the city-state of Lamu, which covered an approximately area of 16 hectares with a population of 3,000 residents, did not have many infrastructural installations. The largest buildings at that time were probably the mosques, neighborhood mosques, which were small, intimate facilities. And more so, unlike many other towns within the region, Lamu had what you can call self-contained utilities. So it did not have public baths or public toilets like Zanzibar that were known like as hammams. So in a nutshell, it was just a simple group of vernacular buildings with very few common utilities. Though it was a very functional town for its time.
Mohammed, we seem to be losing you.
From the nature of the vernacular buildings, we know that the center of the settlement was of buildings in that region, and the intensity, the only common utility. Can you hear me now? Hello?
Yes, we hear you.
Okay.
Thank you.
So even within this nobility area, the kind of public or common utilities that were available were what you would call a daka. And this was part of actually a house. And this is at least where male residents of the house would meet their male counterparts. And this was like a miniature, a public place, public space, open space where they could meet. The vernacular buildings were actually also served by pit latrines, and the grey water would be directed into small, like small gardens where they grew bananas and beetles. And goods were supplied by donkey, so it was essentially a pedestrian town. No motor, no nothing. So there was no need for roads and many other infrastructure. During the early 19th century, escalating tensions between Lamu and neighboring city-states led to the development of the first piece of major infrastructure for the town, which is the Lamu Forest, and it can be seen in the picture, the large building in the middle. The defensive building was the first, so it was military in nature, but it was the first major piece of infrastructure for the town. And soon after, the town started receiving Indian merchants who started building new kind of buildings in front of that fort, because the fort, when it was constructed, it was actually sitting on the waterfront. And they started building new kind of structures on partially reclaimed land. Soon after, the British arrived, and most of the waterfront was actually reclaimed. And now we see introduction of major works in this small town. And when they built if you can see from the picture, the buildings with sort of arcades on the front with sort of arches, they had to be retained sort of, and a seawall out of sticks was constructed. Maybe next slide, please. Yeah, around 1840, a kind of seawall was constructed, and in the 1900s, a more robust construction was built. When it was constructed, it defined a space in front of these buildings, which has become today to be a very important public space. This is the waterfront promenade. This is where everybody who arrives in the town lands, and all goods that are living and people who are leaving the town, this is where they depart from. It is also the venue for a very important event in Lamu, which is the Maulidi Festival. And it has also come to, in more recent times, to accommodate the Lamu Cultural Festival. Later on in the 1960s, the town started to acquire new functions, and as an administrative hub for the British colonial administration, and electricity started coming in. The small parts within the town were paved, and a few other open drain channels started to be constructed to take away the grey water. Next slide, please. Well, I will wait for the slide as I can. Yeah. By 1900, Lamu was already an established colonial administration center overseeing the expansive Lamu district. Many public utilities were established around this period, including piped water, electricity, telephone services, all to meet the evolving urban functions of the town. In the 1940s, what I've mentioned is a proper seawall was constructed, defining a very important public space in front of it. And over the last 20 years, Lamu has grown from a relatively small town of about 10,000 inhabitants to a metropolis of sorts, with hosting about 20 or to 30,000 people. For many years, even though there are no major manufacturing industry on the island, tourism has become the major mainstay for most people. It is supporting a number of other related services, including restaurants, small crafts manufacture, fishing, post office, airline offices, insurance companies, and other private businesses. Next slide, please. In implementing this new urban scheme of a modern town that is busy depending on tourism, quite a number of challenges are being incurred. One of them is unprecedented increasing of the capacity of the town has put undue pressure on the existing infrastructure, causing it to collapse, especially the wastewater and solid waste disposal systems. There's, of course, a lack of funds for the development and expansion of the town's infrastructure, which has already caused it to accelerate. Like from the picture, one of the things I wanted to mention was, maybe I'll discuss it much later, is on the picture on my right, you can see a lot of new services being introduced within the old town, but they have been very poorly integrated. You can see PVC toilet pipes just sticking on buildings. You can see new armored cables carrying electricity. You can also see very, very poorly installed telephone wires and many other things. Next slide, please. The other challenge the town is facing is informal settlements. There are quite a number of settlements. Whatever is inscribed in red is actually the old town itself. And I put these pictures deliberately for us to be able to appreciate the scale at which informal settlements are growing around the town. You can see some circles, which are open spaces that children used to play a few years ago. So in 2013, they were well developed. And you can also see something on the waterfront on the top of the picture, which was like a playing field for young people. In 2012, you can see developments starting to encroach into these open spaces. And the situation today in 2019 is, in fact, the space at the top is totally disappeared. It's full of buildings. The other three remaining spaces are already being encroached at a very fast rate. And that just tells you the scale at which the town is growing at the moment. Next slide, please. Lack of suitability in terms of development plans. The town is lacking proper development plans and very, very weak laws to enforce. Infrastructural needs of Lamu. Over the last 70 years, there's been major technological advances across the globe. Lamu, just like many other or any other town, has tapped into these technological and social advances, many of which require installation of new infrastructure. For example, in our photos, you can see the paving, which is dilapidated and, of course, due to increased usage and increased population. One funny thing I wanted to mention was the street lights. Now we need street lights within a historic environment. But if I look at them, it's like driving to a modern airport. So this was a terrible decision to provide this guy. I think there should have been some kind of thought to it, because it really changes how the town feels. And then we have new services. How do we introduce new life to this old town? How are we able to provide for modern lifestyles so that you can just comfortably accommodate without interfering with the overview of the town? And then you have redefining open spaces. Lamu does not, unfortunately, like many other modern towns, it does not have your conventional public open space. Spaces that are in Lamu are just small hidden spaces which probably the people just meet and talk it over. And I think they must be developed as such. Otherwise, it could be a big issue at the end of the day. And then because it is rapidly expanding, you have many settlements that are far apart from each other. And I think one of the things that the town needs today is how do you connect then these settlements, especially for the elderly who can no longer walk for like 5 kilometers just to visit a relative. The other kind of infrastructure the town needs is water reticulation. For example, in Lamu, the existing system was installed in the 1940s when the town had about around 5,000 people. It was upgraded in the 2000s. The old asbestos pipes were removed, but today the population has increased threefold. So you need to improve that. But the structure of the town provides major technical problems in trying to put this new reticulation system. And that goes for the same to sewerage systems. The town, when it was constructed, it depended on public dry pit latrines. Today, most of the buildings are being converted into waterborne toilets. Then how the engineering part of it is a bit difficult to try and provide conventional sewer systems in this kind of urban fabric. Electricity, from the pictures I shown previously, the electricity is required for modern life, but then the way it was provided, it was not very good. I think that is my signal. So it also goes to things like internet. Previously, the internet was not there. Today, we need possibly fiber, and it's difficult to integrate it into this kind of urban fabric. I will jump to my next slide, slide number 9. Next slide, please. So I will just finish off with a few comments. The world has been unfolding much faster than we can respond. I will give the example of the telegram to the first email to the email that was lost in one generation. Rapid technological advances, changing lifestyle and past social friction have seen a growing demand for new infrastructure to meet needs of residents in historic urban ensembles like Lamu. The infrastructure and conservation departments have probably not been able to respond adequately due to the following: inadequate or insufficient technical capacity to devise appropriate solutions to new infrastructure demands that are fast evolving. Integrating infrastructure into the historic fabric requires complex design considerations and possibly materials. I wanted to show a picture of the Lamu Jyoti, which is out of reinforced concrete, sticking out at the front of a historic building. I don't know, it looks a bit weird. And then you have urban governance. I don't know elsewhere, but politicians in this country, they prefer to have these grand major projects. That is what makes sense for them. Something that can be seen from outer space. If you're standing in the moon, you can see what they've done. And in many times that does not meet the conservation guidelines. And then lastly, how then do we redefine public open spaces to keep the social life going on? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was very rich and very, very detailed. You raised lots of very important points and helped us to understand Lamu from the inside, and we're very grateful to you for that. Over now to Mr. Jmour Montassar. We're very fortunate to have you with us, the site manager of the Medina of Tunis, based at the Institut National du Patrimoine, and chief of the protected zone section. Jmour, over to you. Okay, I would Vous pouvez commencer.
D'accord.
Je...
Oui, je vous entends.
Oui.
Oui. Je peux commencer? Est-ce que vous pouvez faire la projection de présentation?
Oui, oui. Je suis en train de faire ça.
D'accord. Non, c'est le dernier slide. Ça.
Voilà.
Non, c'est pas le premier. Ah oui, c'est ça.
Il y a un petit moment, un instant, entre le temps que j'ai avancé les images et vous pouvez regarder les images.
D'accord, d'accord. Je peux commencer?
Oui, oui, allez-y,
Ouais.
s'il vous plaît.
Bonjour à tous et à toutes. Tout d'abord, j'aimerais remercier toute l'équipe du Centre du Patrimoine mondial pour cette initiative et pour l'organisation de ce laboratoire City Lab. Je me présente. Je suis Montassar Jmour, le gestionnaire de l'ensemble historique et traditionnel de la Médina de Tunis depuis l'année 2018. Vous pouvez passer au slide suivant. Le suivant. Cette présentation s'articule sur 6 grandes parties. La première partie concerne le contexte du site. Deuxième partie, les problématiques, les grands problèmes du site. Troisième partie, les objectifs attendus. Et quatrième partie, la méthodologie de travail ou de gestion par rapport à nos objectifs. Et la cinquième partie, c'est les actions exécutées et en cours d'exécution. Et la dernière partie, en conclusion, le débat et perspective. Slide suivant. La Médina de Tunis est c'est un centre historique déjà inscrit à la liste du patrimoine mondial de l'humanité depuis 1979. Elle fait une superficie de presque de 280 hectares. Son tissu urbain est divisé en 3 parties. Donc, on a la Médina centrale et ses 2 faubourgs, le faubourg nord et sud. C'est une ville vernaculaire avec des bâtiments traditionnels à patio ou à cour. C'est un modèle urbain tournant autour de la notion d'intimité dans un système de voies inertisées. Des problématiques sont apparues. La Médina est en danger de subir le même déclin irréversible comme ce qui est déjà arrivé à plusieurs autres Médinas. Slide suivant. Passons maintenant au grand problème qui se présente. On a des infrastructures vétustes dans le tissu de la Médina, une augmentation des logements insalubres, des populations vivant dans la précarité, un abandon des demeures au profit de nouveaux immeubles, les dégradations partielles du patrimoine, la dégradation partielle du patrimoine existant et de son caractère urbain. Et tout ça, c'est à cause d'une absence d'une vision politique et stratégique de gestion globale de l'ensemble historique de la Médina. Donc, slide suivant. En passant maintenant à la troisième partie où on va présenter nos objectifs à atteindre suite aux problèmes déjà cités. Réhabiliter l'image de la vieille ville et redéfinir son rôle de l'agglomération tunisoise, conserver la spécificité et l'unité de la Médina, assurer leur intégration au reste de la capitale pour éviter sa marginalisation, le renforcement et l'amélioration des infrastructures publiques et garantir un développement local durable du patrimoine bâti de la Médina, développer une approche globale cherchant l'équilibre entre les valeurs culturelles et patrimoniales. Donc, slide suivant. Mettre l'accent sur la légitimité de conscience à tous les acteurs impliqués dans la question du patrimoine de l'ensemble historique de la Médina comme vecteur de développement du caractère urbain, rendre le patrimoine bâti résistant au processus de transformation techniquement et juridiquement en le datant d'une structure capable de s'adapter aux nouvelles demandes. Donc, slide suivant. Donc, en passant à la quatrième partie qui présente la méthodologie de travail adaptée afin d'atteindre nos objectifs déjà cités. La méthodologie de travail mise en place donc on a fait la mise en place de nouvelles stratégies de gestion, de tracer des nouvelles stratégies en instaurant une nouvelle méthodologie d'approche au patrimoine, une approche qui se veut intégrée et durable. Donc, de ce fait, les orientations sont autour de deux axes. Le premier concerne une intervention d'urgence. Le deuxième sera axé sur les stratégies à court, à moyen, à long terme définies par le futur PSMV, qui est le plan de sauvegarde et de mise en valeur de la Médina de Tunis. Donc, slide suivant. Donc, cinquièmement, en passant à l'action, suivant la méthodologie de travail déjà définie. Comme je l'avais dit, il y a des actions qui ont été déjà faites, des actions en cours d'exécution et des actions en futur. Donc, premièrement, les interventions d'urgence qui est suivi par des campagnes de consolidation du patrimoine bâti de la Médina de Tunis, et cela afin d'arrêter l'hémorragie. D'abord, poursuite de lancer les études nécessaires pour la restauration, la réhabilitation, la mise en valeur de ce patrimoine. En deuxième lieu, le diagnostic qui se base sur un travail d'inventaire qui nous donne une idée claire sur l'état de conservation des monuments historiques. Et une fois achevé, il sera la base d'un éventuel observatoire sur le patrimoine bâti de la Médina de Tunis. Ce travail de diagnostic, il était déjà lancé depuis l'année 2013 dans le cadre d'un projet d'inventaire du patrimoine bâti de la Médina et dans le cadre d'une coopération internationale, et qui a duré ce projet de l'année 2013 jusqu'à l'année 2017, qu'on va le voir maintenant ensemble. Donc, ces photos-là nous montrent quelques interventions d'urgence pour consolider et étayer quelques monuments les plus importants de la Médina de Tunis. Donc, slide suivant. Donc, en passant à la deuxième étape, qui est l'étape de diagnostic, ces photos-là nous montrent le travail qui a été fait dans le cadre du projet de l'inventaire du patrimoine bâti. C'est l'une des secteurs de l'ensemble ou de la zone sauvegardée de la Médina, où on voit la cartographie qui nous montre l'état de conservation de chaque bâtiment qui existe à l'intérieur de ce secteur. Donc, slide suivant. Donc, c'est une autre cartographie qui nous montre la valeur patrimoniale, c'est-à-dire l'importance historique et patrimoniale des monuments présents dans ce secteur, qui est, comme je l'ai dit, c'est une partie de la zone protégée de la Médina de Tunis, du tissu protégé. Donc, slide suivant. En passant maintenant au projet d'inventaire du patrimoine bâti de la Médina de Tunis, comme je l'avais dit, qui est un projet de coopération internationale qui a été déjà fait entre les années 2013 et 2017, mais malheureusement, il est maintenant resté inachevé. Donc, mais quand même, il y a une grande partie qui a été faite par l'équipe de la conservation de la Médina de Tunis, dont on va le voir maintenant dans les différentes cartographies. Donc, slide suivant. Suivant. Le sport. Donc, c'est l'une des cartographies qui a été faite dans le cadre de l'approche urbanistico-architecturale de l'inventaire, du projet de l'inventaire, qui nous montre les bâtiments réaménagés, les bâtiments en ruine et les bâtiments rasés dans tout le secteur sauvegardé de la Médina. Donc, slide suivant. Suivant, s'il vous plaît. Donc, c'est une autre cartographie qui nous montre la valeur… Non, l'avant, avant. Oui, c'est ça, oui, c'est bien ça. Donc, c'est une autre cartographie qui nous montre la valeur patrimoniale des monuments historiques au niveau de secteur sauvegardé de la Médina, où on trouve en rouge les monuments classés, les monuments historiques classés, et tout ce qui est en vert, ce sont les monuments jugés importants. Donc, le slide suivant. Ça, c'est une autre carte.
Désolé, il y a un petit instant après votre commande.
D'accord. Donc, c'est une autre cartographie qui a été élaborée dans le cadre du projet d'inventaire du patrimoine qui nous trace les équipements et leur emplacement dans le tissu de la Médina et de la zone sauvegardée. Donc, slide suivant. Donc, ça, c'est une autre cartographie qui nous montre bien l'état de conservation de chaque bâtiment dans les tissus de la Médina, qui reste toujours inachevé, malheureusement. Donc, il nous montre l'état de conservation de chaque monument, de chaque monument de bon état jusqu'aux les monuments rasés et en ruine. Donc, slide suivant. C'est une autre cartographie aussi qui nous montre la morphologie urbaine de quelques zones déjà étudiées dans le cadre de ce projet d'inventaire et qui nous montre bien la volumétrie de chaque monument et de chaque secteur de la Médina de Tunis. Donc, slide suivant. Donc, le projet d'inventaire du patrimoine bâti a pour but de tracer surtout les projets de restauration et de mise en valeur par priorité, suivant l'état de dégradation de chaque monument. Donc, il nous permet d'avoir un tableau de bord ou un planning de travail par rapport à notre intervention dans les monuments. Et ça, suivant leur état de dégradation, comme je l'avais dit, et par rapport à la valeur patrimoniale et historique du monument, aussi par rapport aux projets futurs, par exemple les projets de création de circuits touristiques lorsqu'il est intégré. Le monument est intégré au niveau d'un parcours touristique, donc on va l'exécuter et le mettre en priorité afin de mieux exécuter ou d'avoir un parcours touristique bien achevé. Donc ça nous présente la planche d'études de l'une des grands projets qui sont actuellement en… Non, slide avant s'il vous plaît. Oui, c'est ça. Donc, ces planches-là nous montrent l'étude architecturale qui a été déjà faite dans le cadre de projets d'inventaire du patrimoine bâti et qui est actuellement en exécution. C'est le monument, c'est Turbat el-Bey, c'est l'un des plus importants monuments de la Médina, donc qui se trouve au niveau d'un circuit touristique, de l'un des circuits touristiques de la Médina. Donc, c'est pour cela qu'on a commencé de faire l'exécution de ce projet comme priorité, en collaboration, bien sûr, avec les autres autorités. Donc, slide suivant. Sont quelques photos du chantier en cours d'exécution, chantier de restauration, de mise en valeur. Slide suivant. Donc, en passant à la troisième action qui a déjà été définie dans le projet d'inventaire. Donc, c'est l'analyse socio-économique. Il s'agit d'une étude scientifique ayant pour objectif la connaissance des besoins et des attentes des habitants et la mise en place des bases permettant de prendre les mesures nécessaires pour le développement socio-économique et les politiques de cohésion. L'analyse socio-économique s'effectuera selon les points de vue démographiques, sociologique, dynamique immobilière, organisation territoriale et administrative, avec intégration et polarité territoriale. Donc, slide suivant. Donc, en passant à la quatrième action, donc, comme je l'avais dit, que c'est le projet de l'inventaire du patrimoine bâti, il reste toujours inachevé, malheureusement. Donc, suite à cela, donc on a lancé l'étude d'élaboration d'un plan de sauvegarde et de mise en valeur, le PSMV de la Médina de Tunis, qui va être le projet, à mon point de vue, le projet global qui va tracer toutes les stratégies, les politiques à moyen terme et à long terme de notre secteur sauvegardé. et il va rassembler tout le travail de l'inventaire qui a déjà été fait, l'analyse socio-économique, les projets futurs de valorisation qui se trouvent au niveau de la Médina, etc. Donc, c'est pour cela donc on a opté de lancer le projet de PSMV afin d'avoir une étude complète de notre vision globale envers le tissu protégé de la Médina de Tunis. Donc, on est en cours d'élaboration. Donc, pour cette phase, il était préférable qu'elle sera confiée à un bureau d'études spécialisé dans le domaine avec une approche participative intégrant tous les intervenants concernés. Donc, slide suivant. Passons à la dernière partie où on va proposer quelques questions pour ouvrir les perspectives et le débat dans le cadre de la 4e session qui est le repenser des infrastructures dans un contexte urbain historique. Donc, la première question, donc, quel rôle tient le quartier ancien et son patrimoine bâti dans le développement urbain des villes à travers le monde en général et des villes tunisiennes en particulier? Comment favoriser l'action protectrice du quartier ancien en assurant la bonne conduite des projets urbains et quels sont les acteurs qu'il faudrait mobiliser? Quelles sont les difficultés à rencontrer dans la mise en œuvre d'une politique de gestion d'un site patrimonial? Slide suivant. Comment convaincre les acteurs cibles de la nécessité des actions prévues et considérer la ressource patrimoniale comme vecteur de développement? Comment prendre en charge l'habitat dans un quartier ancien dans le cadre d'une intervention opérationnelle tout en maintenant et tenant compte de ses habitants? Et quelle est la méthode la plus adéquate afin d'intervenir sur un tissu déjà existant? Slide suivant. Donc, de quelle manière aussi et la méthode urbaine recommandée permettra-t-elle d'améliorer le cadre bâti et les conditions de vie des quartiers dégradés? Quels sont les moyens et les démarches qu'il faudrait mettre en œuvre afin d'assurer le succès de notre projet? Bon, merci pour votre attention. C'est la fin de ma présentation.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm sorry about the delay. There is a tiny second delay between when I click the slide and when it goes forward. But it makes it easier if I'm running it. So the logistics of what we adjust to with these. But thank you, Rami, for your explanation as well. All right. Well, we've had these 4 very, very rich presentations, and lots of different points have been raised to reflect on and discuss. And you've also all been working in your subgroups, so there's a lot of new ideas, I'm sure, that have come from those exchanges. So the floor is open, and we are waiting to hear from you. I see that there are already some questions, as I see Rami's hand up. Let me just take a second to look at the list to see there's Adnan and Lasana Sise who have already raised their hands. So we put Rami after that. Okay, Adnan, please go ahead. Adnan?
Oui, oui, merci.
Oui, allez-y, s'il vous plaît.
Merci beaucoup, oui. Vous m'entendez là, hein?
Non, pas
oui.
bien.
Très bien.
Pas bien. Oui.
Juste, bon, à propos des 2 interventions, j'ai une une proposition ou une vision pour la première intervention de Madame Elisabeth Weins et les idées qui ont été évoquées justement en matière de gestion des espaces urbains et de l'infrastructure urbaine dans les ensembles historiques est fort intéressante, c'est vrai, mais ce qui j'aimerais bien et je proposerais à ce qu'on pense à intégrer les bâtiments et les monuments en particulier, les monuments repères dans nos ensembles historiques particulièrement, comme si c'était une continuité de l'espace urbain. À mon avis, on a tendance à imaginer ou à penser que l'espace urbain se limite à la rue, à la ruelle, à l'impasse ou à la placette. Mais ce n'est pas vrai du tout. Il va au-delà de ça, au-delà de façades, au-delà de murs, derrière les portes. Aussi, ça peut être une continuité de l'espace urbain. Quand on regarde le comportement, par exemple, dans nos médinas, des utilisateurs des espaces de culte, par exemple, dans les mosquées ou dans les églises un peu partout en Europe, c'est une continuité du parvis, c'est une continuité de la place, c'est une continuité de la rue. Il y a des exemples réussis. Bon, c'est intéressant, j'ai vu quelques exemples de Lepkin ou de Zaher Hadid, les deux architectes de renommée qui ont certainement essayer une autre manière de composer et de traiter avec cet existant et avec le patrimoine en général. Donc, pour résumer, à mon avis, en matière d'infrastructures urbaines et de requalification urbaine, il ne faut pas nier ou se limiter juste à l'espace public tel qu'il est défini, qu'elle soit place ou place haute ou autre, mais il va au-delà des murs et on doit impérativement intégrer l'architectural, le bâti, comme aussi espace public et faisant partie de l'espace urbain. Et ça devient réellement un projet de réhabilitation et de requalification d'ensemble qui prend en compte l'ensemble du quartier avec le contexte social, bien sûr. Deuxièmement, j'ai une petite remarque aussi à propos de l'intervention de mon collègue Montassar Jmour, qui occupe maintenant la place que j'ai occupée entre 2013 et 2016, et à propos justement de ce grand projet d'inventaire que j'ai piloté pendant 3 années. Et l'objectif premier, en fait, de cet inventaire, dans sa partie valeur patrimoniale et état de conservation, c'est tout simplement en superposant les deux cartes, l'État et les établissements de l'État qui sont censés gérer le patrimoine pourront tracer une stratégie. Les bâtiments les plus importants et qui ont une valeur exceptionnelle et qui sont dans un état très dégradé, d'après l'inventaire, doivent être traités en priorité afin d'assurer leur pérennité, afin de limiter les dégâts et afin peut-être de leur donner quelques années de plus dans leur durée de vie. Donc ça, c'est pour résumer. Et bien sûr, ça va servir pour devenir une plateforme, c'est un observatoire qui va assurer le suivi. Son montage architectural sous forme d'un système d'information géographique ou autre est très possible et il faut continuer à travailler dessus. Voilà, grosso modo, donc pour récapituler, j'aimerais bien qu'on axe notre réflexion autour de l'infrastructure urbaine et que les monuments et l'architecture fait partie aussi de cet espace public urbain. Voilà, madame. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup. Okay, we have now, there was a couple of hands up. There was Lassana Sisse, then Rami Daha, Zayed Minty, Russell, and then Carlo. And then we will stop it there and get back to the panelists. Okay, please go ahead, Lassana. Allez-y, s'il vous plaît. Lassana Sisse, allez-y, s'il vous plaît. Votre micro. Oui, merci.
Bonjour. Alors, je voudrais d'entrée de jeu féliciter les animateurs, à savoir Elisabeth et Daniele, qui qui ont campé le sujet. Vraiment, je suis très content parce qu'ils ont soulevé la triptyque patrimoine mondial, espace public, valeurs universelles exceptionnelles, etc. dans les villes, donc, dans les dynamiques urbaines. Félicitations. J'ai deux questions, en fait, deux questions que j'adresse à Mohamed Ali.
Lassana, on n'entend pas bien, s'il vous plaît.
Vous m'entendez pas? Allô?
Oui.
Allô, vous entendez?
Oui.
Maintenant,
oui,
ça va pas?
allez-y.
Voilà, donc je disais que j'ai deux questions. La première, s'adresse à... Ma première question s'adresse à...
Il y a l'écho, je ne sais pas si vous il y a des difficultés.
Peut-être vous pouvez continuer avec quelqu'un d'autre en attendant que je règle.
Lassana, peut-être vous avez le 2 enregistrements. Vous avez...
Oui, j'ai deux appareils.
Oui, peut-être seulement un, c'est mieux.
C'est plus pratique, d'accord.
Merci.
Allô?
Oui.
Vous m'entendez?
Oui. C'est mieux, merci. Oui, allez-y, s'il vous plaît. C'est tout? On n'entend pas. Lassana, peut-être votre micro? Ah oui, allez-y, s'il vous plaît. Allez-y, Lassana. Non?
Bonjour, c'est un message du technicien. Je pense que ça peut être un problème lié à il ne doit pas être sur les bons casques micro. Il a dû changer comme on l'entendait mal et c'est pour cela qu'on ne l'entend plus. Il faudrait qu'il aille sur les microphones en bas à gauche de l'écran et qu'il choisisse le casque micro ou le micro qu'il veut utiliser. Pardon d'avoir interrompu.
Okay. Lassana, I think we're having a technical problem. Perhaps you could write down your answers, your questions, and then we can come back to you. If you could try, we could see if it can connect better. But only one connection would probably work better rather than two. And we'll come back to you then. So we move now to Rami. Please go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I have a question / a comment actually to Elizabeth. You know, with the historic urban landscape, you know, we're talking about the city in terms of continuous historic layers of cultural and natural values. And the notion of the impact of development, how to interfere within historic settings and environments, whether through adding to existing historic buildings or interfering within the public realm and so on. Definitely, all conventions talk about distinction between the existing fabric and the new addition. And but at the same time, in addition to this notion of distinction, they also talk about this notion of complementing what is existing and compatibility and what have you. And then the design of that distinction becomes the worry of the architect or whoever's going to be doing the intervention within the historic environment. I do understand very much the importance of guidelines and regulations and how relevant they are to the process of actually making new additions to historic buildings or what have you. But I want to emphasize another very important issue, which is, it might be a bit personal, but it is how can we implement, or not so much implement, but how can we arrive to different levels of place understanding, which I think is extremely important from my own personal experience, that informs designing that distinction and informs how you interfere. And I'm not just talking about levels of place understanding at a physical level, but also at discursive level, but also at typological, from an architecture point of view, and typomorphological levels, which is the relationship between the architecture and the city. I truly feel that arriving at these levels of understanding will really enable us to design our interventions in a much better way. So I want your thoughts on this issue, especially this level of understanding at a typological level and typomorphological. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have now Russell and Carlo after that.
Thank you, Jyoti. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
Excellent. Yes, I found this session fascinating. I had a quick question to Mohammed Ali Mwenje from the city of Lamu. Obviously, a huge mega infrastructure development is taking place there, and it's going to impact considerably on the region. And I believe this is one of many mega infrastructure projects underway as part of the Belt and Road Initiative. Another, for instance, just down the coastline at Bagamoyo in Tanzania is also underway. And I wanted to ask, how do these mega infrastructure projects interface with culture? And in the case of Lamu, how is Lamu going to benefit directly from this project? And will it help to address some of the funding shortfalls that Mohammed Ali mentioned? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we move to Carlo Francini.
Okay, thank you, Jyoti. Okay, first of all, thanks to Elizabeth, Daniele, and colleagues from Lamu and Tunis. I have a question for Elizabeth and Daniele, the other colleagues and experts. We are working on the heritage impact assessment. One of the difficulties is to identify a functional, technical, administrative path to include heritage impact assessment in the administrative and the urban planning procedures of the city. Are there any useful examples or models we can follow? Okay, thank you. And I put my question in the chat. Stay here. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I see that Lassana is back. Lassana. Allez-y, Lassana.
Merci beaucoup. Vous m'entendez?
Oui.
Voilà, très bien. Deux questions. La première, c'est à Mohammed Ali. Alors, quel est le maire a parlé de cette ville, le maire de la ville de Lamu, et en parlant d'espace, il a parlé de la mosquée. Avec le Covid-19, la mosquée, c'est un endroit, un espace public de rencontre. Apparemment, les gens sont, je ne sais pas, je ne peux pas dire frustrés, mais le fait de ne pas se rencontrer, c'est un problème pour la population. Bon, ces villes, c'est à l'instar des villes, hein, au Mali, ici, à Djenné, Tombouctou, etc. C'est des villes précoloniales qui ont aussi subi des transformations pendant la période coloniale. Et après la colonisation, avec les projets et programmes de développement, il parlait d'équipements nouveaux pour la ville. Hein. Et il a parlé d'électricité, d'eau. Djenné connaît les mêmes problèmes. Et les interférences pour des antennes paraboliques et des antennes d'Orange maintenant, des téléphonies, c'est énormément de difficultés. Et il a soulevé un point important également, c'est les financements. On promet beaucoup de financements, on fait très peu de choses. Alors, quel est l'état de conservation actuel du site au vu de tous ces problèmes? C'est la même question que j'adresse à notre frère de Tunisie, la Médina de Tunis. Il a soulevé des problèmes assez graves qui m'ont sérieusement inquiété concernant la valeur universelle exceptionnelle. Il a parlé d'abandon de demeures ancestrales et la construction de nouveaux immeubles. En rapport, si c'est un site du patrimoine mondial, quelles sont les actions? Bon, il a parlé d'études, hein, de projets menés sur les sites et maintenant des termes de référence. Si c'est de gros financements, on sait, on a l'expérience ici au Mali. La Banque mondiale, par exemple, c'était les BTP. Heureusement que la banque est en train de changer. Si les gens investissent dans les infrastructures, ils ont des cibles très précises. Leur préoccupation, ce n'est pas la conservation du patrimoine. Les éléments du patrimoine de façon globale. On veut des équipements point barre. Comment concilier les deux? C'est-à-dire, tous ces aménagements, il y a des dynamiques urbaines difficilement contrôlables. Difficilement contrôlables par nos États. Pas global, mais en tout cas nos États en Afrique, parce que la Tunisie, c'est vrai que c'est une région arabe, mais je considère que c'est un pays africain. Alors, comment concilier le développement urbain dans ce contexte pour des villes classées patrimoine mondial et la conservation des ressources du patrimoine? C'est-à-dire, quelque part, on veut le beurre et l'argent du beurre, comme on le dit en français. Qu'est-ce qui se passe dans ces domaines? Parce que c'est beaucoup de difficultés à gérer actuellement dans le contexte, en tout cas, des pays pas très développés. Voilà, merci.
Okay, thank you very much. We had thought that we could stop the list at Carlo and come back to the panelists, but we find there's so much interest and so many different comments that people have. It's really important to have everybody's voices here. So if you will allow me, I want to be able to get as many people to speak right now and then come back to the panelists after a few more speakers have had a chance. And then maybe if you could just take notes and keep track of your questions, we'll come back to the panelists. We have now Medina from Eritrea. Please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you so much, Jyoti. Are you hearing me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much for the opportunity you give me. And thank you so much also for Professor Daniele Pini and Architect Elisabetta for your comprehensive presentations. It's very, very inspiring. And my question is concerning to the urban infrastructures, especially in the historic cities. Provision of urban infrastructure is the most challenging one, especially aging infrastructure like water supply, sewer systems. Most of the people, they need quick fixing and install. So in this case, how the city administration can manage provision of infrastructure as well as conservation issues. This is one of the most challenging issues in Asmara case. So really, if you give us some good practice how to manage these cities. And another issue also, I would like to ask from a good case study from Montassar Jmour. So it's really, we have also conducted a very comprehensive inventory. So not only for a building, but also we include infrastructures, water supply, storage systems, electricity. And it's also, we have some similarities. We have very short time now in this debate. In some other time, I would like to share more further with you because we have similar types of methodology we are applying on the conservation of Hosagrahar. So one of the issues I would like to see, are you focusing only on the buildings or still you are conducting inventory on the infrastructure? That's also for us a good model to adapt within our context. So thank you so much for your opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you very much for these very important points. We have Afsana next. Afsana Sultani, please go ahead. Afsana Sultani, please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
First, I would like to thank Elizabeth and Daniele for their excellent presentation. The case studies that Elizabeth shared with us were very useful, but you know, I come from Iran, a country where the climate is hot and arid, and the traditional architecture is introverted. We have the very simple facades outside the buildings, and then we have everything faced in the center of the building. So first, I would like to ask if she also or any of the other colleagues have any examples or case studies for adding infrastructure in such urban contexts where has the same morphologic and typological aspects. And I'd also like to share with you our major problem in our historic city of Shiraz, where the passageways, the traditional passage, the historical passageways are very, narrow, and now there is a very big passion from on behalf of the municipal and authorities to widen these streets, because they say that these narrow passageways do not match the standards for fire or earthquake or safety of the buildings. So I'd like colleagues to discuss more about these issues. How can we match our cities to the infrastructure, or on the other side the infrastructure, if there are any examples of matching the infrastructure to these historical cities without demolitions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We have now, I'm trying to see, my list seems to have got, I think Zayed Minty was next. Zayed Minty, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. My question was for Lamu, but it could also be answered by the person from Tunis and from the two speakers. It's about the Lamu person indicated that water and waste needed to go through some kind of modernization process. So I'm wondering to what extent the effects of climate change are being considered, especially on water availability in your plans. Similarly, energy, for example, changing from carbon to solar. And I'm particularly interested because there's quite a lot of new engineering methods about kind of, putting things into one tube and making it easier to reach these things. So I'm wondering to what extent these things have been looked at, and more importantly, in other words, how are you leapfrogging technologies so that you're ahead rather than trying to catch up at a later point to climate change needs? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think I'm just going to take a break here to come back to the panelists. And I know that there's still a long list of speakers, which we're very excited to have all of the people who have not been speaking so far have contributions to the debate. But let me just get back to the panelists for some of your inputs. And then I will also speak for a minute on the historic urban landscape questions from the UNESCO perspective. But let me first over to the cities because there were some specific questions for Montassar and for Mohammed Ali. So please, first on Tunis and then on Lamu. Montassar, allez-y, s'il vous plaît.
Oui, merci de me donner la parole une autre fois. Donc, par rapport aux questions de Monsieur Lassana, c'est ça? Donc, par rapport aux dynamiques urbaines de la ville de la Médina de Tunis, donc on a le cahier des charges et la réglementation en vigueur qui sont définis dans le cadre d'un plan d'aménagement urbain, donc toutes les interventions ou les travaux dans la plupart des bâtiments existants dans la zone sauvegardée donc sont réglementés par un cahier de charge bien déterminé et sous l'avis de l'Institut National du Patrimoine. Donc, par rapport aux dynamiques urbaine de la ville, donc il est très bien contrôlé par le moyen de plan d'aménagement urbain actuellement, en attendant à l'élaboration de plan le PSMV, le plan de sauvegarde et de mise en valeur, donc qui va être spécifique et qui va spécifier et entrer dans les détails et la particularité de chaque zone. Donc, ça, c'est la question de dynamique urbaine par rapport aux investissements. Donc, on est actuellement, on encourage, donc le pays encourage, donc le ministère des Affaires culturelles et l'Institut aussi du patrimoine encourage bien l'investisseur d'investir et de prendre et de faire des projets touristiques, culturels dans les bâtiments qui se trouvent dans le secteur de la Médina afin de réanimer et de redynamiser l'activité touristique et commerciale de la ville. Donc, c'est ça. Donc, si par rapport aux questions de Monsieur Lassana, donc par rapport aux questions de Medoni, donc comment les autorités peuvent servir les services publics par rapport à la conservation du patrimoine. Donc, toute activité ou tout projet qui va être exécuté au niveau du secteur de la Médina, donc il faut être travaillé en collaboration étroite avec tous les intervenants et les autorités, surtout en présence des spécialistes de l'Institut National du Patrimoine afin que ces projets-là être encadrés et être en conservation et en sauvegarde de notre patrimoine. Donc, il ne faut pas laisser les autorités travailler les projets à l'intérieur des secteurs sauvegardés sans faire le suivi et le contrôle et surtout l'approbation des études dès le début. Donc, dans ce cadre-là, donc on peut atteindre à des projets qui sont bénéfiques pour les services publics et en parallèle qui conservent et sauvegardent bien notre patrimoine et surtout la valeur exceptionnelle de notre patrimoine. Donc, l'autre question, c'est est-ce concentrer sur les bâtiments au-dessus? Donc, par rapport à la deuxième question de Monsieur Medani, donc au niveau du projet de l'inventaire du bâtiment, l'inventaire du patrimoine bâti, pardon. Donc, est-ce on est concentré sur juste les bâtiments au lieu dessus? Donc, en fait, le travail il est fait suivant des étapes bien déterminées. Donc, du particulier vers le général. Donc, le travail a été commencé bâtiment par bâtiment et ensuite on a une cartographie qui trace bien l'état de conservation de tout le tissu urbain de la Médina. Donc, on travaille du détail vers le général. Donc, c'est la procédure qui a été suivie dans le cadre du projet d'inventaire. Donc, on travaille sur les bâtiments et ensuite sur le tissu urbain en globalité. Donc, par rapport à Monsieur Zaid Menti, la disponibilité de l'eau et de l'assainissement et la possibilité d'intégrer les panneaux solaires, par exemple, comme énergie renouvelable dans les tissus, dans les centres urbains historiques. Donc, c'est difficile dans le cas de la Médina de Tunis d'intégrer les panneaux solaires ou les panneaux photovoltaïques afin de fournir ou de produire les besoins nécessaires de la population de cette zone, parce qu'on sait très bien que ces panneaux solaires ne sont pas vraiment très intégrés par rapport au style architectural déjà existant de la Médina. Donc, on ne préfère pas fausser la lecture de ce tissu urbain et de ce style architectural qui est un style particulier par ces panneaux photovoltaïques ou ces panneaux solaires. Donc, on collabore bien avec les autorités afin d'avoir d'autres solutions qui doivent être intégrées et par rapport au contexte historique de la Médina, par exemple, de renouveler l'installation ancienne et d'avoir une installation enterrée, bien sûr, et qui suit le besoin, quel que soit le besoin par rapport à l'eau potable ou par rapport à l'assainissement des eaux usées ou par rapport à l'alimentation en réseau d'électricité, donc par des solutions qui ne faussent pas l'aspect architectural, historique de notre centre patrimoine de la Médina. Donc, il faut vraiment avoir des idées en collaboration, bien sûr, avec toutes les autorités nécessaires. Donc, voilà, donc, s'il y a d'autres questions, donc, je me souviens, ce sont juste les questions.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much.
Merci à vous.
Okay, we move now to Mohammed Ali Mwenje.
Thank you once again. I think I will first of all respond to a question by Russell, and this is on the mega infrastructure projects. These projects are actually taking place about 50 kilometers away from Lamu Island. They are priority projects by the national government, and I do not even think they have enough funds to do everything themselves. So it's not unfolding as promised or expected. It's being done in a piecemeal basis. So it has been very difficult to argue for things outside the actual project itself. They are struggling, I know, to undertake like for compensation of lands that were absorbed in the project. So it is something that is in the pipeline. The authorities, the concerned authorities in terms of cultural heritage and national heritage are trying to put their case forth that mitigation measures are part of this project and that financing be provided for the same. Otherwise, heritage impacts study was undertaken. It wasn't enough. Right now, a consultant has been appointed, rather was appointed to do the SEER, the Strategic Environment Study. And he has been asked by the courts to have it revised so that he can integrate issues to do with culture and heritage. Moving on to a question by Nyadi, and this was on the street lights. The problem is not actually on provision of lights as such. Lights are required. They are very, very much needed. But the problem is actually the design of the lights. There should have been appropriate designs that conform with the architectural style of Lamu. They shouldn't be sticking out like it's you're driving through a highway or going to the airport. There could have been better designs that the lights could have been provided and they would not be interfering with the aesthetics of the town. And then there was a last question on oh, I'm not forgetting. This was from Lassen, and it was to do with issues of I think it was on heritage impact assessment, if I'm not wrong, which I've just spoken about.
Okay. Did you have anything else you wanted to add?
Yes, it would be nice to understand how tools of the historic urban landscapes then can be used to meet some of these challenges like Lamu is facing. More so like integrating new infrastructure that can support new ways of life within still the old fabric without compromising the outstanding universal value.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we go now to Liz very quickly and then to Daniele, so that we have still a very long list of speakers, so we want to be able to give everybody a chance. Liz, over to you.
Okay, thank you. A couple of comments. Firstly, from Mohammed, I really appreciate it. There's so many universal issues, I think, in historic cities we deal with. You talked about the grand iconic insertions for political gain. I think it's so important that we have long-term visions, not short-term fixes for the places that we deal with, because often those grand iconic insertions can do a great deal of damage, and we need to see them for what they are, which is political gain. They're not actually benefiting the place. So a note of caution. And then Montassar, I was interested in your comment about saying that you had abandoned ancestral homes. And in working in China, I've experienced that in the World Historic, the city of Pingyao, where there are wonderful courtyard homes which are being abandoned just off main streets, where these courtyard homes are being well adaptively reused into hotels for comfortable accommodation. But this kind of level of comfort isn't available for locals. And so that locals want to move out because that's where they can have a toilet and a shower rather than a bucket in the corner in the ancestral home. And what you saw in Shaoxing in China was the World Bank undertaking examples of urban rehabilitation projects whereby local communities were provided with their places adaptively improved with insertions of new infrastructure, toilets and showers and so forth, so that the communities were kept in place. And sometimes it's agencies like the World Bank where you can get the funding and also the sort of intellectual rigour to realise that this is the way forward to do that. So that was a comment for the two case studies. Then I had a comment back from Adnene who talked about the importance of buildings being integrated into the public spaces. I couldn't agree with you more. Of course they merge into the public spaces. There's not a hard line at the property boundary. But nevertheless, when a development occurs, the assessment of whether it goes ahead often stops at the property boundary. And I think mechanisms like ensuring that, particularly for major projects, that there is required investment into the public space so that you can get private contribution requirements through your planning framework into the public realm. And these can be legislated, effectively legislated into the public, into the planning process. I then had a comment, I'm being as quick as I can. Rani, you talked about Hull providing, you had a nice discussion, and clearly you understand a lot about the Hull model. And you talked about wanting to know more examples of typological and typomorphological examples where these kinds of models are used successfully. And I think that was also commented elsewhere. That's why I think this model is useful, but there are other models, like in Australia, we use the Borough Charter approach as well. I think the importance of the Hull model is like the Borough Charter, the importance of really understanding the values of the place before you do the interventions. And so framing policies before you do the interventions. Sometimes we can get too bogged down in that process so nothing happens, but it clearly has to be a balance of those two things. And one thing we haven't talked about much yet in this webinar, I think, is the importance of champions and leaders, because it is the leaders, the inspired mayors, you know, sometimes community representatives, people who've seen these visions implemented elsewhere, and I'm not saying bring that vision back and copy it, but people who can inspire and give confidence whether or not a new insertion is appropriate or not. And now moving on to Carlo about heritage impact assessments. I think these are fantastic tools. And I'm involved often in preparing one or on the receiving end at the assessor. I think the value in undertaking heritage impact assessments is that if you get a independent or quasi-independent, and sometimes it's difficult because the applicant pays, generally the applicant pays for the HIA, which means the result can be skewed because of course they're going to put in an HIA which says, yes, this is a brilliant outcome. But if you have an assessor doing an HIA who is able to challenge the actual designer or the architect and say, have you thought of doing it this way? Often you have a discussion with that architect who says, well, I was responding to the client's requirement. And yes, if you say this is what we have to do, secretly, I agree with you, but my client was directing the outcome. And that's where I think the value of the HIA is important, and skilled people who undertake these assessments shouldn't do them completely separate from the process. They should be engaging and liaising with more appropriate outcomes. That's where I think they can be effective. Asfane from Iran, you asked for some introverted architectural examples. I haven't been to Iran. I'm not well experienced in your region of the world, except that to say that if you understand the typology of the place, you described that, you know, a lot of the stuff happens inside within those internal courtyards, and that the actual street facade can be in fact quite bland and simple. Well, that's the outcome that you want. And often the interventions can be too complicated, and the facade interventions can be too complicated, and they don't understand the intrinsic simple values of those facades. And maybe there's more opportunities internally because of the lesson, because it's the private space, that you do allow more flexibility. If it's the public realm, and again, depending what your OUVs are, if the OUVs really emphasise the importance of the typological characteristics of the city. I think that's all I was specifically asked to comment back on. Hope I've covered it.
Thank you very much, Liz. And over to you, Daniele.
Unmute, Danielle.
Yes, there are so many issues that have been raised that I don't know where to start with. But in any case, I think that I agree with Liz on her comments to many issues. I would simply like to add that in many cases, almost always, I would say, the outstanding universal value do not cover completely the range of values of an historic city. In many cases, the cities have been inscribed into the World Heritage List, at least this is my experience, because of some specific aspects, but not for their general urban heritage values. I can make a lot of examples. Therefore, planning the conservation of an historic city, of course, means to respect and to protect the outstanding universal value. It's obvious. But it means also, in many cases, sometimes to widen the perspective. What is essential, and here I come to the HUL recommendation, is to inscribe the conservation process in the more general urban planning process, and to consider the historic city, or the urban heritage, as part of a wider urban ensemble. To this effect, I think, just to answer to Lesana's comment, that conservation is a part of the development process, is not against development. And maybe this is not evident in many situations. But I do really think that conservation of the historic heritage, of the urban heritage, is a premise for the development of the city, not only because of tourism, but also because of many other activities that may be related to heritage. The comment of Rami was quite interesting because in Italy we are, talked about 20 years about typological and typomorphological approach and so on. So I fully agree with him that I consider that this tool can be useful to understanding the urban context, but these are not enough. I think that the real effort that should be made is to link the physical features to the wider cultural features, to the wider, to link the tangible to the intangible. And from this point of view, I'm afraid that the typological or the typomorphological approach do not help too much. As for the HIA, I don't want to repeat what Lisa said, but I do consider that this tool is important, is interesting, if it is used during the planning process. I don't think it can be included in the plan, in the end, the result of the process, but this is a tool that should be used during the process of planning to understand what can be done and what should not be done, and how to do what can be done, and in order to avoid mistakes. But I don't think that HIA are really tools to be used in the plan. I must say that personally, I'm trying to use it in a plan that I'm doing for a small World Heritage city without too much success because of the reasons that Lisa explained very well. Nobody understands very well who has to pay for that. Nobody really wants to do it, and so on. And then in the end, the result is not completely reliable, because if you are a little bit skilled, you can do anything everywhere. Just it is enough to mitigate the impact, and that's all. So in the end, it could become useless. As for the question concerning infrastructures, these are very important. Talking about water infrastructure, electricity infrastructures, and so on, technical infrastructures. I do consider, again, that the HUL recommendation gives a very interesting lesson. Difficult to apply, but important. It is necessary to involve all the different stakeholders. And from this point of view, it is important to understand that the stakeholder in the case of the historic city are not only the authorities concerned with heritage, with planning or whatever, but also the stakeholders which are involved with the water supply, electricity, all the technical aspects, of course, transportation, traffic, and so on. it is important to put all these people around the same table. I know that it's very difficult. What is more difficult is that the people, for instance, of waste management only looks at the width of their truck, and that, I don't know, the guys of the electricity only look at their technical standards. The efforts should be made to combine all the different technical needs and the technical requirements with the basic requirements of heritage protection. It may be difficult, but in the end, years after year, it could be done, at least. In Italy, in many cases, after 40 years, we manage, more or less. So we don't have much disasters, you know, from the technical engineer. Sorry, I don't want to offend any engineer, but to combine the technical requirements of the engineers with the requirements of the heritage protection. Because in the end, heritage protection makes money. We learned that heritage protection, unfortunately, I would like to add, makes money. It costs, but it makes money. So if you understand this, you will understand that it is also important maybe to not to really respect some technical requirements, but to adapt the technical solution to the need of protecting heritage. Thank you.
Thank you very much for these very detailed responses. I'm going to go very quickly to some of the others who are in line. But before we do, I just want to pick up on a couple of points that were raised, which Liz and Daniele have already addressed a bit on the historic urban landscape recommendation, the HIA, and the morphological, because if you remember, one of the things that I was showing you in the beginning as something that came out of an expat meeting we had in January was a list of, the attributes of urban heritage identity. And this is very important because this was precisely the point, was that the OUV doesn't cover everything about a place. So there are certain local values, you might say, that are heritage values, some of which are tangible and some of which are intangible, some of which may have to do with natural geographical setting or with its historical aspect or the intangible aspect even. But these have to be understood and documented, and then the guidelines have to respond to both the local and the OUV. If you just allow only the OUV to be the dominant, then there is a disconnect with the local community, with the local place. If it is only the local values, then it's no longer World Heritage because the OUV is lost. So it has to be a balance of both. And this is something that that list can, when you're talking about the morphological and typological and so on, that's only, if you look at that long list of indicative categories, that's only one part of it. There's a whole lot of others. And infrastructure is very much part of this. So when you're talking about what type of traditional infrastructure and how that can be included, that's part of this list also. And I want to remind you also that in the newer, you might say newer version of the approach to the implementing the historic urban landscape recommendation, the methodology for implementing the historic urban landscape recommendation, the very first step is being able to establish a governance structure that is multi-sectoral. And this is exactly what you're talking about. And this is key, because if you don't bring the infrastructure people in together, you don't bring the urban development people along with the heritage conservation people, there is no conversation, because otherwise it's just about the conservation and everybody else is carrying on with urban development as they normally would, ignoring the heritage. And the heritage people are sitting there saying, heritage, 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 there's nothing happening. So this is really, really key right from the beginning. And as we've heard before, Daniele and Liz have been saying this, and others as well, that it's not about conservation for the sake of conservation. It has to be for a better city for everybody. And that's where I think the key issue is. Okay, enough. And I want to give everybody a chance. We have, first of all, I want to just recognize somebody from China whose name only shows up as administrator, who gave us a very nice message in the beginning. I don't know if you'd like to come on screen and speak. I'm sorry, I can't call you by name because it just shows up as administrator from China. Anyone from China here who would like to say something? Okay, well, thank you very much for your very kind message. We move now to Sana, Nia. Please go ahead, Sana. And I'm going to request all the speakers to please be succinct so that we get everybody a chance.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. My question is to Mrs. Elizabeth and Mrs. Daniele, if possible, and for debate also. My question is it possible that for future inscriptions to World Heritage List, we consider having a vertical buffer zone, if I may say, regarding the tendency of constructing towers? I mean, it's true that impact studies are there to avoid such situations, but in some cases, the towers are still constructed and affect the integrity, even when outside of the buffer zone. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we have Bhutto Gosiniati. Please go ahead.
Yes, correct. Thank you very much. Two quick follow-up questions to Mohammed. He did mention why the streetlights raised some concerns from conservationists. Then I have a quick follow-up question to say, is the HIA in use in Lamu? If not, why not? And if yes, how has that experience been like in preventing similar occurrences? And then to the extent that cities must also take care of the well-being of their residents, what are the main sources of income in Lamu? This is an out-of-interest question when Mohammed did mention that there are no industries. And I'm just curious to say, what are the sources of income? How is the city taking care of the well-being of its citizens through job opportunities?
Thank you very much. We have Soyabu Varisu. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. I would like to raise the issue, ask a question about the reinvention, if I can say, of historic cities and the whole issue of city identity. You can see now with the political movement going on, the removal, for instance, of status, that then touch to how we build city and how we also define a city identity. So my question would be, when it comes to, let's say, redefining the narratives of city, or let's say set up some identity, do you have experience that are different from what we are seeing when some statutes are being removed just to refine how citizens would like to see the city, and that goes sometimes against, if I can say, the rules of conservation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we have Shika Jen. Please go ahead. Shika?
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Yeah. Hi. Good evening, everyone. So my question is actually for Elizabeth, and I really appreciate her presentation, what she showed on the infill design, because of course, as architects and designers, we want to introduce something that is a sensitive design in harmony, and at the same time, not repetitive or, replicating the old. But I've faced this problem in my practice, specifically in the context of Rajasthan state in India, where the community, the locals are very conventional, and we also have a very rich repository of craftsmanship there. They are living craftsmen there who are still producing the traditional, working with the traditional building materials and producing excellent buildings in the same manner. So while introducing these infill proposals there, we engage with the community and we ask them to respond to such interventions in historic cities. And there we find that the community themselves don't want any new style or any contemporary look, but they want to go for replicating it. And there are, of course, craftspeople who benefit from it in terms of socioeconomic their socioeconomic situation, as well as promoting craftsmanship is one of the objectives of us as conservation professionals. So I wanted to ask Elizabeth, how would one respond in such a situation?
Thank you very much. Now we go to Christina Lodi. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you again for this wonderful section. And I'd like to add to our colleague the issue of climate change. And I'd like to add other threats, because we know that the last events of fire in our protected buildings in Brazil, especially, for instance, the National Museum, that it's getting a lot of efforts to rebuild. And the problem is, this fire was related to the fire system was not working in the park area. So we're not just talking about the protection in the individual buildings, but in the whole areas. I'd like also to bring the problem of the floods, that it's very common in a lot of our cities. So I'd like the panelists to address this, mainly the first ones, to address how important it is to plan a disaster risk management plan to our planning for the conservation of our cities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now have, there was, I think, a couple more people, but I seem to have lost them. There's Adnan again. Adnan, please go ahead.
Oui, merci beaucoup. De toute façon, Monsieur Pini a déjà répondu à certains de mes questionnements, et en particulier, pour rebondir sur ce qu'il a dit, c'est que l'approche typomorphologique à elle seule n'apporte pas vraiment grand-chose. Le deuxième point que je veux axer une réflexion autour, c'est qu'en fait, dans nos ensembles historiques, dans nos pays en général, et je parle du cas de la Tunisie, on a parfois tendance à gérer les ensembles historiques qui sont partis de la ville comme si on gérait un site archéologique antique, parfois, hein, et même dans d'autres pays arabes. Ce conservatisme un peu poussé aux extrêmes, sans prendre en considération que c'est une ville, qu'il y a une population derrière, qu'il y a des besoins, qu'il y a des relations sociales, des modes de vie, etc. Et ça, malheureusement, quand il est pris en considération, et comme vient de le remarquer notre collègue de Mali à propos des nouvelles constructions qui prennent lieu et place au centre de la Médina de Tunis, des bâtiments en plein cœur de l'ensemble historique, c'est tout simplement aussi, à un certain moment, le refus des autorités systématiques par pur conservatisme poussé aux extrêmes, sans plutôt essayer de s'intégrer dans ce contexte social très particulier. Et pour en finir, je dois aussi reparler et mettre l'accent sur le fait qu'il ne faut pas, à mon avis, dissocier l'architectural de l'urbain. Ils font d'eux, ils participent à la création de ce paysage culturel et ce n'est que la traduction de notre paysage culturel. Donc il y a l'architectural, il y a l'urbain, mais n'oublions pas qu'il y a aussi des habitants, des utilisateurs de l'espace qui bougent dedans, qui se croisent, il y a des relations sociales. Ce intangible heritage, il ne faut jamais aussi l'oublier. Voilà, et merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup. And now we have Macmillan Modenda. Macmillan Modenda.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think my question goes to Muhammad Ali. I think in his presentation, I talked about a number of issues affecting the historic city or town of Lamu. I got interested when he mentioned the issues of unplanned settlements. And then I was just thinking in my mind, because at times this is quite common in third world countries where you find such settlements keep on growing. The reason being there's so much of political interference at times when you want to maybe stop the developments. My question is there such interference when it comes to such issues? Because even the issues of lighting, at times you might not be consulted as a manager of the city, but a politician will just make a decision because to them maybe the historic fabric of that city it does not matter to them. So how is the political interference in terms of running the city affected him? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And now we have Rosabella Alvarez. Please go ahead.
Hello. So yes, this is a bit related to the question that Christina posed about what happens when historic cities, in spite of their OUB, do have some inherent problems. For instance, a lack of accessibility for older people, for disabled people, especially now that one of the great things is that now disabled people and older people have better chances to live productive lives, to be active until longer. But what happens when cities are not really, historic cities can have many problems. And also related to that, related to Christina's question, is what happens when cities have some things that are vulnerabilities related to earthquakes, fires, floods, a very vulnerable location. And I'm thinking of ideas when infrastructure projects and new technologies are not just, where worry is not just how can they be sensitive to the existing environment, but how can they actually contribute to improve upon problems. And especially I'm thinking climate change, because I'm thinking that many places that where climate change is making places, historic cities, that did not have those problems before, it's making them more vulnerable. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we have Benedetta. Please go ahead.
Yes, hello. So thank you very much for your great presentations. In particular, I wanted to make a comment to Elizabeth and Daniele, great presentation. I have the example of Verona, the Verona city, and Tocati. So Tocati is a festival that is performed on a yearly basis in Verona. So here we have one of the few examples where World Heritage and ICH are in the same location, because Tocati is in the process of being inscribed in the ICH list. So in this case, precisely for protecting the places and the sense of identity and the sense of community belonging, several locations in Cremona were permanently, by legislation, dedicated to traditional sports and games. And traditional sports and games are the games and sports that are performed in the Tocati Festival. So I wanted to ask the speakers, Elizabeth and Daniele in particular, if they are aware of similar cases where by legislation part of the towns are permanently devoted to intangible cultural heritage, in particular in city, World Heritage Cities context. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, before we get back to the panelists, I just want to see if we can take one quick group photo with everyone, please. If you could all turn on your cameras for 1 second, we'd like to be able to capture everybody. Please also, the technicians, the interpreters, if we could please have all the windows open Also on the next page, Rahil, if you could very kindly take a picture from all the pages, I'd really appreciate that. Soyibu, we don't see you yet. We'd like to see everybody on for a minute. Thank you very much for this participation and for turning on the cameras. That's great. Okay, perfect. Now, to get back to the speakers, to the panelists with this long list of questions, we would like also just to be able to see we have 3 more minutes left within this planned time. We can continue for another 15 minutes, but we will lose interpretation. On va perdre la traduction si on continue. So just to let you know that we could go forward, but that would be the problem. Okay, so can we get back to first to the cities, to Tunis and to Lamu, please, for your responses to the questions. Montassar, allez-y, s'il vous plaît. Très court, s'il vous plaît. Votre micro, s'il vous plaît.
D'accord, donc c'est bon, vous m'entendez? Oui, donc par rapport au point déjà élaboré par Elisabeth, donc je rejoins parfaitement avec Elisabeth que les projets, les grands projets de conservation, de valorisation de nos centres urbains historiques doivent être suivis par une motivation politique, bien sûr. Donc, parce que si on va élaborer, par exemple, une grande étude de valorisation d'un centre historique, sans avoir étudié les budgets à fournir pour exécuter ces études ou pour exécuter les projets à venir. Et donc, il ne va pas y avoir lieu dans ce projet. Donc, il faudrait vraiment motiver les décideurs politiques pour soutenir et pour investir et donner des budgets pour les grands projets du secteur du patrimoine. Donc, quel que soit, donc on peut aussi, comme Elisabeth l'a dit, donc de solliciter le Banque mondiale ou de chercher des bailleurs de fonds dès le début, en parallèle avec l'élaboration de ces grands projets pour avoir lieu. Donc. Et pour les autres questions, donc je rejoins aussi parfaitement avec les points entamés par mon collègue Adnan Benejma, surtout au niveau de ne faut pas dissocier l'architectural de l'urbain et surtout d'intégrer les habitants des villes, des centres urbains historiques comme des acteurs et comme des acteurs dans les grands projets dans les grands projets de mise en valeur et de sauvegarde des tissus urbains. Donc, il ne faut pas négliger du tout le côté social et le bien-être de ces habitants afin de ne pas avoir des villes vides ou délaissées par ses habitants. Donc, il faut toujours l'intégrer dans les priorités.
Do have to be include.
Merci.
D'autres questions par rapport à la vulnérabilité des centres urbains historiques. Donc, il faut toujours, bien sûr, prendre des précautions et de renouveler les infrastructures à l'intérieur des ensembles historiques et de le réadapter pour confronter ces catastrophes naturelles par rapport de point de vue inondation ou d'autres catastrophes. Donc, il faut toujours donc, refaire et redimensionner toutes les institutions afin de confronter ces catastrophes donc, dans les sites. Merci.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry to move you along, but we have to get to everybody and wrap up. We have 5 more minutes grace, but we do have to wrap it up after that. All right, we now, Lamu, please, Mohammed Ali Mwenje, please. Very shortly.
Yeah, very quickly, I would respond to a question by Zaid on the modernization processes of wastewater for climate change. This is something that we are trying to deal with, and because several people have actually been given work to look at how the system can be improved, including a UNESCO appointed expert. But still nobody has come up with a very concrete proposal on how you can upgrade wastewater disposal and water reclamation within the same space in such a urban fabric. I will also respond to Nyadi, who wanted to know about sources of income for Lamu. Lamu is essentially a touristic town. Just to give you some statistics, it's about 60% directly or indirectly dependent on tourism. Of course, there are other supporting or civil service, teachers and things like that, but they constitute a very small percentage of the employment. Whether or not we have an HIA, the HIA that we have currently that was prepared was in light of the first 3 berths for the Lamu port construction. And that's the one that I was referring to. The government is still trying to look for money for implementation of the proposed mitigation measures that were prescribed therein. Third question was from Macmillan, and it relates to politicians. Do you have political interference in the informal settlements? The answer is yes. And the trend has always been, if you want to do something wrong in this setup, make friends with politicians. You will get by. I am also glad that Swaibu is listening. What happened is that we had a new constitution in 2010, whose implementation began in 2013 and 2017. A lot of that relevant legislation was being prepared, including the National Cities Act. What happens is that they are supposed to mainstream or integrate or provide for us with new legislations that are relevant for the management of the historic town of Lamu. Unfortunately, politicians are just politicians, and we need to bring them to speed so that they appreciate cultural heritage, so that they can formulate good policies for them. So, responding to the call for support for 2020, we have put in a proposal for sensitizing or teaching our politicians, the local authority within Lamu, for them to be able to understand the significance of heritage and how it directly contributes to the economy, to the identity, and to the well-being of the Lamu people. And I hope the Africa World Heritage Fund will be able to support us in that line. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will give 1 minute each to Elizabeth and Daniele to wrap up, and we'll come back to you on Friday. So Liz, 1 minute for your last statement.
Fantastic question from Shika, and there's lots I could say about India, and maybe we can communicate with that separately. Similarly, question from Benedetta about examples. Penang, if you look at the Penang Heritage Trust website, you'll see a fantastic emphasis both on intangible festivals and tangible heritage. And then Christina, in relation to disaster plan and risk management, key to think ahead. When you think about the Bhaktapur earthquake and indeed the fire at Notre Dame, both of those places had to think from first principles. How were they going to conserve and reconstruct what was lost? And you saw there was a lot of debate before there was a decision to reconstruct the Viollet-le-Duc flèche for Notre Dame. And so I think if you can plan ahead and anticipate what might go wrong, you can then get on to the reconstruction issue much quicker if you've got your policies in place, which is, after all, what conservation plans are all about, that they must anticipate those kinds of issues as well as disaster issues. Daniele.
Thank you very much, Liz.
Yeah, no, I think about the question of Christina and others concerning climate change, I think that a study on the vulnerability should be at the base of any urban planning exercise right now, and including effects of climate change and so on. About Sana'a, the vertical buffer zone, well, it will be nice, but I don't think it could be feasible. But in any case, I think that in the plans, and I try to do that, you can preserve some visual corridor that may help, to avoid skyscraper, in a visual, in an important visual corridor or visual relationship to monuments and so on. About that non-issue, le conservatisme excessif, yes, I agree with that. I would like to remind that when we discussed about the HUL recommendation, someone said that conservation is indeed a sort of management of change. And I think this is correct. You cannot preserve a city like an archaeological site. Some archaeologists will say that archaeological sites are also projects and inventions. But in any case, a city, a living city, has to modify, it changes. And the conservation is just a matter of controlling and managing the process of change. That means to fix limits, restriction to change, but also orientate the change. Well, I think concerning Benedetta, I don't know the Toccami story, but I think that the relationship about intangible and tangible heritage cannot be solved in a conservation plan or in a land use plan. Some tools have to be found in order to preserve and enhance the intangible heritage, which should be specific, in my opinion, and depends very much on the character of the intangible heritage. But I think that this is very important to link the tangible and the intangible when possible. I agree with you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. A big thank you to Liz and Daniele, to Jmour, to Montassar, and to Muhammad Ali and Mwenje for your excellent presentations. Thank you to all the participants for your very active involvement and your very excellent questions that have really helped to deepen the discussion and take it forward. I know we didn't get to all the answers today. We have a little bit of a longer session that we can plan for Friday. So we can plan for a 3-hour session, make sure that we start off by answering any remaining questions on this session and then get into the session for next time, so that we really, these are really important topics and important questions that you're raising. So we're not trying to make it short by any means, but we just have to work within the limitations of the technology and the setup that we have. So with many thanks again, and look forward to seeing you on Friday, fully energized and recharged for a whole new session with 2 different leads. Thank you and bye-bye.